we're going to go through those sorts of things. All right. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for caring about People's Church and contributing to this conversation. The intent of this call is similar to the type of meeting that we do when we introduce the budget. So like we do the budget hearing a week or two before the annual meeting. This is that same type of pattern that we wanted to follow for this very important conversation that is happening next week. So a couple of things that we're going to do is first, I would like to address the format of the meeting and keep the first part of this, which will probably just take a couple of minutes, to talk about the format of the meeting next week, and then address any the steps that have been taken in the past. And Diane's dog is coming here to visit me, so that's nice. And then get into a little bit of the content and the background of what we're going to be discussing next week. I would, in respect to everyone's time, like to limit, if it's acceptable to the group, this conversation to within the hour. Because I think we can cover the basic points of what we need to do in that time, because we're not going to resolve any of the topics that might be coming up today. We just want people to be aware and to know where to go read and what to look at and what to think about. Does that make sense? Okay. So first, in terms of the format of the meeting, I did publish the agenda, which should be available on the bylaws page or the members document. I don't remember which section it got posted in.
Can I please say that it is in the Engage with Us tab so that people know when they go to the homepage, they will be able to find it.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that. So a couple of points of business that we're going to do is we're going to take the opportunity of hopefully having a quorum in person to formally accept the minutes and ratify the actions that we did through all the online voting processes in 2020 and 2021, so that according to our current set of bylaws, those will then be official actions by the congregation. So those pieces of business should go pretty quickly, and it's hard to go back and change what we've already done, but we make it a formal vote in order to do that. And then we'll move into the conversation about the bylaws. We've asked Sherry to introduce the bylaws to the congregation for discussion. So this is a relatively long document, and we're trying to organize the meeting in a way that will be time efficient. So the plan at this point is to use the side-by-side comparison version of the bylaws that you can also find at that site, to kind of walk through and get a feel from the people who are present, both online and in the room, about what articles do and do not need discussion. Right? Because if there are articles that don't need discussion, those articles, the intention is that we would entertain a motion to accept those articles and to complete that piece of business, and then handle any discussion on ones that they want to be discussed, that we'd handle those individually. So that's the general outline of the format of the meeting. Are there any questions about why we chose to propose it that way, or how that's going to work, or concerns about how that would work?
No.
Carolyn?
Just to clarify, are we ratifying each article individually, or are we sort of walking through and then ratifying the entire document, or not?
So I'm going to speak to that, and then I'm going to ask Barb to correct me if I've misspoke. The intention is that, like, say we determine that there's the articles that do not need discussion, and thank you, I'm starting to see hands. Thank you for doing that. that articles that don't need discussion, we would take a motion and a second and a vote on those articles, and then handle the articles that need to be discussion one at a time. And then at the end, we may still need, Barb, is that right? At the end, we may still need yeah, Barb, if you
Okay.
help me.
Depending on what happens, there would be, if you vote on each article as you go through them, you don't technically need a final thing that says approve everything as discussed and amended and presented, whatever. You don't actually technically need that. What you usually do is do a motion at the end that authorizes either the secretary or the bylaws committee to make any punctuation or spelling changes, and directs them to produce an official copy of the bylaws to be put on the website. Now, if someone really wants to do a final motion at the end saying to approve the revision of the bylaws as presented at the meeting or as approved at the meeting, we can do it. It's not necessary.
Does that address your question, Carolyn?
No,
Tim?
not me.
Oh, I really have kind of the same question. So here's what I heard you say, Susan, and this may or may not be correct, is that you're going to go through and say, we're going to briefly mention each article and see if anyone wants to have a discussion of them. So Article 1, anyone to discuss that? No one's, we're not going to discuss it now. We're just going to decide whether we will discuss it.
Yes.
Article 2, anyone want to discuss that? Article 3, I will say I have an amendment that I want discussed. And maybe someone else has an amendment. Article 4, Article 5, I forget how many articles there are.
Yes, that's
And
the.
so then
that's
you'll
the-
go through that and you'll discover that, Article 3 and Article 5, people want to discuss those.
Yes,
So I gather that before you discuss Article 3 and Article 5, you want to have a motion to approve the other articles. Is that right?
yes, yes, to approve
Okay.
anything that does not,
So the first thing you'll do is you'll go quickly through all the articles, see if anyone wants to discuss them. But we're not going to discuss them. We're just going to decide
yes,
what.
we're gonna sort out what. Yes, we're gonna sort out what we
a
can
meta-
move
it's a
forward
meta
with quickly.
This stage.
Yep.
And then you're going to have a vote on the articles that no one wants to discuss. And if they don't want to discuss them, presumably it'll pass unanimously because no one wants to discuss them. I mean,
Yes,
and then you'll say, okay, let's now go back and turn to the articles that people want discussed,
yes,
presumably in order or something. I don't know what, presumably in order of their number or something. Is that right? Or did I
Yes.
mishear you?
No,
no, you've
You got it
described it
right.
perfectly.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, Nikki?
Yeah, I had a two-part question. One, I got confused. Are we not having a service because the newsletter says that the meeting is starting at 10:45? So does that mean we're not having a service on Sunday? We're going straight into the meeting, A. And B, my understanding is you need a quorum in person. What about the
Yes.
people on Zoom? Will they be allowed to vote or are they just there to listen? I mean, in order to partake of this discussion and vote, do you have to be at church? Or once the quorum is at church, are we going to meld? And Barb
So-
seems to have the answer.
well,
Barb?
Susan can give the answer if she wants to give the answer.
Yes.
I mean,
I
we already.
will,
discussed-
and then Barb, if I've misspoken. So here's the intention, right? The current constitution / bylaws require that a quorum be present together in person. So yes, we do need a quorum in the building in order to be able to conduct votes, and only the people in the room will be able to vote. But it is our intention that the people that attend by Zoom at least have the opportunity to contribute to the conversation. Right? Because that's within our current bylaws, that's kind of the compromise that we can make, so that people that aren't comfortable coming at least can contribute to the discussion, even though they can't be counted toward the quorum. And unfortunately, we won't be able to allow them to vote. But that's also part of the reason why we want to move forward with this, is because this document opens up the flexibility of our voting practices, so that we can have a broader voting if we're still in, high COVID situations, come May. Does that answer your question, Nikki?
It answered the second part. Are we not having a service? Are we going directly at 10:45 into our congregational meeting?
Yes, so we're going to do an opening similar to what we do for a service, but then we will segue into the meeting. It won't be the service and then the meeting afterwards. So we'll do an opening and then move into the meeting section. All right. So Nikki, does that answer your part? And I see Brian's hand.
I just want to make sure that the reason we know the logic behind that is we're going to have parents that are helping with RE, but the rest of the church will be meeting. And the logic of that is, Barb described to me yesterday, is that otherwise we then have kids that would want to be going home and be hungry if we attempted to do it after the service. So this really makes a lot of sense from a lot of different reasons.
What about Tim's question that was in the chat?
Yeah.
Could you repeat it?
That is a really good question. My understanding, and we can certainly discuss this, is that it would apply to the meeting in May.
Could you repeat his question in case we
Well, my
didn't know?
question was simply this: if we approve the article of the bylaws that allows for remote voting, which I forget which article that is. You can tell me what article number it is. But if we approve that at some point in the meeting, are you then going to say, oh, okay, now all the people online can vote remotely? Or are you going to say, well, wait a second, we didn't notice this in advance. That's not really proper. We really should postpone this till the next meeting.
Yeah.
That's what, logistically, someone's going to raise that.
Yep. Barb, I think I need your help on that one.
Okay. If we were amending the bylaws, the answer would be yes. Since we're revising the bylaws, I'm not sure, and I will check. Because that would be a good point that but I think that's a difference between the revision and amendment, but I'll look it up.
But thank you. This is why we have calls like this, right? Because then it brings up these kinds of multiple perspectives. Lois?
I have a question too. I ended up talking to about 12 people that I consider very active people in various church groups. And only 2 knew what in the heck I was talking about when I talked about the bylaws, the revisions, the everything. And I suspect that this is broader than just those 12 very active people. So I'm very concerned as to why can't we just vote on the part that says in the future, we can have absentee ballots, we can have Zoom ballots, and then leave all of the Article 3, and I think there's another article number that's going to have a lot of discussion until when more people can learn about what's happening. I'm sorry, I know you guys spent forever on this, but the rest of us, we just sort of kept mushing along for the 2 years. And this, in a sense, seems like it sprung on us. And I'm sorry, I know it wasn't. But I think that out here, that's the way a lot of people are reacting. We've only got 15 here. Some people said, nah, you know, I've had enough of Zoom for today, or the sun shining, or whatever. But if we really want a sense of the church's feelings, let's do it later on these issues. Good golly, I didn't even get through everything Rochelle gave us to read. If we all have to educate ourselves to that extent, it's going to take some time.
I appreciate your sharing that, Lois. Honestly, we had not thought about breaking down the document into sections to present sections, because the bylaws committee has presented it to us as a total document. So honestly, I don't have a good thought out answer to that, but I do appreciate you sharing that with us. But we are a little far down the road to completely track. And I don't want to think that it's not being heard, but I wish I had heard that earlier than now. But I do appreciate you sharing that. All right, I see Barb, and then Nikki, and then Connie.
Go on to pass me. I'm still looking.
Okay, Nikki.
Yeah, I've been involved with some of the conversations that Lois has been involved with, as well as with different ones. And the basic reaction so far is that when we have a congregational meeting, usually we have information beforehand. If there's anything important, they're usually small group meetings in room 19 explaining it. But with COVID, none of this took place. And so we're getting all this reading material, but there's been almost no discussion about why things are being done. Is there really a need for it, or what is the perceived need for it? And so these small group discussions that have taken place in the past have not taken place with this. And this is actually, some of these are major changes. And without any kind of small group discussion, and the feeling that I've had talking to some of the people is that what Lois said is just we're being dumped on. I mean, we knew about some of it because Bob Harden had been part of our group, and he was also part of the bylaw committee, and he was sort of telling tales out of school. But that was just it. He was telling tales out of school, and other people never heard what he was saying.
Thank you for sharing that. Connie?
A couple of things. One is, I don't know if the various articles are separable. In other words, if we only adopt part of it, does that make some of the rest of it not make sense? And somebody who's more familiar with the interconnections will need to look at that if we consider adopting only a piece of it now. The other is, I am a person admittedly who notices things like bylaws. And I frankly felt inundated with information and opportunities. So it's interesting. I don't know the answer to that, but I certainly have found a lot of information in the Friday newsletter things and in the regular newsletter and in conversations, but that's me. And I know I'm weird that way, so.
Okay. So Adam, we'll take your comment, and then I would like to address some of the socialization of the bylaws piece. So Adam.
Hi, how are you doing?
We are very well, thank you.
Yeah, I have a question for you. Can I able to vote for member of but because I will be citizen a couple weeks because I have interview for citizenship on March 9th. And after that, can I able to vote for that?
Barb?
If you have
Let,
signed,
let me check this. So Adham, you have not signed the bond of union, and so you are not a member of the church. We've talked about this. If you want to sign, let me know and we will get you the paperwork.
Okay.
All right.
But we can't get you to vote by next week because it takes there's a waiting period. Okay,
I'd
we'll
like
figure
to
this out.
All right. And
He's
just,
confusing citizenship with membership. Would you explain the difference?
Adham, we'll talk tomorrow, okay? And get to the bottom of it. I'll give you a call.
all right. So just to be aware, I'm having a hard time attending to the people and the faces and to the chat at the same time. So if someone's willing to just continue to monitor the chat, and if I'm missing something, to please flag me somehow. So as far as the socialization of the bylaws, Carolyn or Brian, would you like to recap the steps that were taken last fall in preparation for the final revision?
Sure, I'd be glad to do that. There's a team of 3 of us that designed a process that involved putting announcements in every newsletter for 3-4 months at least, and many of the congregational emails, letting people know that documents were available. Denise, Barb, and I all recorded videos covering every article and posted those on the website. The links to those articles, documents, comparisons, background were all there, and they've been there since, I think, August. And we have referred to them frequently in all congregation communications. So from the person who was part of the team for creating those, I'm kind of resonating on the other side of that with Connie for having almost feeling like we inundated people, and we were actually a little concerned about that, but we tried to do visual things, reading things, so that we offered accessibility for people who might have internet access problems and computer device issues and all of that. So then in September, we started with 5 congregational discussion sessions. All of the dates of those were advertised. There were 2 in-person outdoor, and there were 3 on Zoom, and those took place in September and October. Starting, I think, September maybe 27th was the first in-person, and then the rest of them were in October. So I don't know how those were missed, but I'm kind of also resonating with Connie that bylaws is not a hot topic of entertainment for very many people. So I suspect, and I honor that, but it most certainly wasn't for a lack of Barb, Denise, and I spending many, many hours thinking this through, writing, video recording, and posting.
Thank you, Carolyn. So I'm just going to take a quick, Catherine?
I remember reading them several months ago, and I talked with somebody about it. There was one thing I wondered about, and I thought most of them were like, oh, okay, that makes sense. That's my take on the whole thing. I mean, you sent them out, the changes, and I have not read the new changes. I was going to go this week and look to see, but it doesn't seem like it's that much of a big deal.
You haven't read them.
I have. I read them before. I read the whole thing.
Need to be up to date.
Yeah.
Well, and it is, I do know that the final version of the bylaws was up, I believe, in, sorry, I've got some,
Early December. The final version was November 29th.
Yeah.
yes. So they have been posted and available for quite a while. And so as far as the timing piece, you know, the bylaws committee posted it in December. We did make a conscious decision as a board to start like the weekly emails after the holidays, because we were uncertain as to how much attention they would get during the December holidays, but they have been available for a while. And probably we're feeling a little bit of, you know, the vote is now coming upon us. It makes it a little more real and urgent than the posting starting in December. So there is a lot of reading material. There are articles that have been posted from multiple perspectives. We do encourage people to read that so that we can have as good a conversation as we can have next week. And that we can at least come to a solution that gets us started, gives us a place to start. The bylaws is a living document, right? And can be revisited at any time that a member of the congregation, you know, brings it forward, or the board, or anyone actually, you know, in order to look at refinements. But hopefully we can at least come to a solution that allows us to move forward with a more current document. It also allows us to release the bylaws team as concluded with their work, which they have been doing for us for a couple of years. And we would like to be able to relieve them.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, to move on to other work in the church. So.
And to everybody,
Yeah. So please do read, do have conversations. I wish that I had had some of this feedback earlier than now. And I will do the best I can. Lois?
One of the things that I found very frustrating is that as I read through the bylaws, in some cases it just said, oh, that's handled in the policy handbook. And I was left with, and where in the heck is that? And has anybody ever finished writing that? And then I found out, okay, it's in the congregational document. And I was left with still wondering whether the wording of that had been changed by the board to sort of match the bylaws, or whether you're going to do that later. And I kept thinking, am I the only one who can't find the policy handbook? Because in some cases that seemed to be pretty important.
So the policies as they are currently written are on the members section. But that's also another reason why we've moved forward with this vote, is because we also know that some of the policies in the policy handbook are very dated. And so for the board to move forward with the revision of all the policies in partnership with the staff, we need to have a document from the congregation that helps set the tone and direction for conducting that business. So again, policies can always be revised and updated. Those recommendations can come from members of the congregation to the board in order to tailor things to meet the needs of the congregation. But policies are part of the board's work. And we would really like to be able to update all of our policies and procedures. And as we've discussed it that this year, it doesn't make sense for us to revise policies and procedures based on the current bylaws when we have a new set of bylaws that are ready, for conversation and action.
Of a request, if our parliamentarian would speak to why the strategy of mentioning so often in the bylaws that many things will be handled in policy. There's a parliamentarian reason for
There is a
doing that.
reason for it.
Mhm.
Consider how difficult it is to change bylaws. If we put in the places where you look at what we have suggested be done in policy, they're all things that require a fair amount of detail and procedure and may turn out to be quite lengthy. If you put those things in the bylaws, that means that then is set in stone until you amend it. If we put it in the policies and we either our circumstances change or we discover that something doesn't work quite the way that we thought it worked originally when we are now at this point. If we put it in the bylaws, it would take another one of these whole procedures to change it. If we put it in the policies, then the board can essentially change it at one of their meetings, and people who want to have input on the policies for removing members, the policies for voting, etc., we can go to the board and have the board deal with any problems that arise on a more timely basis. And that's kind of the distinction between putting it in policies than putting it in the bylaws.
So really all we're doing is saying, okay, this is how we want things to run. And then anything else will the board will deal with and we'll work with policies, what I'm hearing?
Yeah. And so, and in terms of voting, we don't know exactly how well it will work to do kind of a hybrid system and how we count the votes. And the technology is changing, and we may have better technology in terms of counting votes on people who are on Zoom meetings and people who are in the room, and working out exactly how to do that. We didn't want, at this point, we didn't think we had enough information to project for the future, because our history on amending the bylaws is that we amend maybe every 3 or 4 years, and we do a revision. Now it's 2015, I forget exactly, 2005. Anyway, so that's the reason why we did this, kicking things into the policy manual. The advantage of having that mentioned in the bylaws is that the board must produce that policy.
Mhm.
In other words, the board can't just say, oh, well, we don't have to do that. No, the bylaws says there must be a policy on this.
Ah, that's a good one. I like that.
Mhm.
It gives an accounting.
I mean, basically, we could have had a policy on these different things, but the board also could say, well, it's not, we're not commanded by the congregation to do that. And basically the bylaws is a congregation saying to the board, we must
Mhm.
have a policy on this.
Ah,
Right.
okay.
And we're looking to support that, right? That's
Right.
that's the next step in the work, right? Is to move forward with
And
that.
it is kind of a way to chunk it when you talk about, well, can we look at this in chunks? Well, that means that policy will be a chunk that can be in discussion with the board members and the congregation members to find a viable method of doing that policy.
Mhm.
The bylaws just say you need to have a policy on this.
Denise?
Could I speak to that? So as both a member of the bylaws committee and the board secretary, I just want to reassure you or let you know that at the last board meeting, the board adopted 3 policies that they would be relevant no matter what, but they are relevant if the new bylaws are adopted. I don't know why we're getting a terrible echo here. The policies are discipline and removal of board members, membership removal and disruptive behavior, and ministerial search committee member selection. So those are already in place.
And also do keep in mind that as policies are posted, feedback from the congregation is, encouraged and welcomed by the board, for us to have as input. I mean, there's 9 people on the board. That's 9 people's perspective. And we do the best we can to try to think about how everyone interacts with this, but it's only 9 of us. So, if you're ever reading a policy, if that's something that moves you and excites you, like some of us contracting, technical people, let your board members know, because then we can take that into account. So there's a couple of folks that I see on the call that I have not made any comment yet, and I want to make sure that it's open, that if anyone that hasn't spoken yet would like to. I'm seeing some shakes. Excellent. Well, thank you.
Rochelle?
I just feel like it's our duty to express, our appreciation again.
Yes.
And to reiterate the amount of opportunities that were very thoughtfully and effectively presented. I did participate in a lot of those things, listened to those videos and attended one of those calls. And, it's hard to motivate people, but I think that as members who weren't part of this process, maybe the best thing we can do is in this today and the next couple of days, explain to people, we actually did have a lot of information that we may have missed or not noticed on time, and let's go do our homework so we're prepared, because we do have a week and we know sometimes deadlines are our best motivator. So just want to speak in support of all the work that's been done.
I also wanted to say that this has been enlightening about the process, which is sort of the discussion, what we were doing, and the fact that the policy that was not clear to me either. And thank you, Lois, for asking about that, because I looked at that and wondered what the hell that was, but I didn't ask. And then I'm glad she did. So that makes a big difference to me, because there were some things that I wondered about and they weren't covered. So that's good.
Denise, are you saying that the parts of the policy manual that we can read now online is what the board passed about removing a board member and removing a member from the church? Are those already acted on by the board? And that's new language?
So the board adopted the policies, whether that's been incorporated into what's available on the website, I don't know.
They are available on the website. And also, so again, these are starting points, right? The board reviewed the documents. We did make some edits to what was originally proposed, and the board did vote and accept them. But again, they're always open to commentary from the congregation so that we could potentially revise them and further tailor them based on additional information.
Thank you. You guys have worked hard.
Tim, I did actually glance at the comments, and I would have to agree that lots of people find this to be a very dry conversation, right? And you have no idea how excited I am to see this many people on and caring about this. Nikki, you got your hand raised?
I got confused with the last conversation. Like I must have missed some words along the line. Did I understand this conversation to say that you revised the policy based on the new bylaws, even though the bylaws haven't been changed?
So we talked about that at the board meeting when we were discussing, should we, I don't know why I'm getting this horrible. Okay, maybe it went away. At any rate, so we talked at the board meeting and said, should we make the passage of, you know, like adoption of these policies contingent upon passage of the new bylaws? But the consensus was no, that these are policies that would be useful and meaningful no matter what version of bylaws we had. So kind of like what Barb was saying, there's, if you have things in your bylaws that sort of order the existence of policies, then that's, you know, that would, you know, you would have to have the policy. But just because something's not mentioned in your bylaws doesn't mean that you can't have a policy about it. That was my understanding of our discussion. So that's why the board decided to just go ahead and adopt the policies. I mean, they are responsive to what would be in the new bylaws, and maybe Barb can elaborate better.
Well, for example, this thing about removing a member.
Yeah,
Our
that's my concern.
bylaws, our current bylaws don't talk about it at all. That does not mean you cannot remove a member. What it means is that the procedure for removing a member has to follow the 40 pages in Robert's Rules of Order about how one censures or removes a member, which is not really what our church would do. It has to do with trials of in the membership, having a congregational meeting where you would vote on having to remove a member. That's not what we want to do. So you have to realize that there are these behind things that, since our bylaws are silent on the issue of removing a member, that's not equivalent to saying that you cannot remove a member. It's
So
just
why are we
saying that,
bothering with the bylaw?
well,
What
because
happens if we don't pass the bylaw that says we can remove a member? So now the policy still says we can, even though the congregation has turned down the bylaw that says we can?
well, if you say, okay, another
That was my issue with
that
the bylaw, the
ineffectively,
policy.
if we never removed a member, what we essentially had was an administrative removal. If someone has not attended church in a number of years, has not had any contact with any of the church staff in a number of years, has not given any money to the church in a number of years, we remove them from the membership list as inactive. But that isn't in the bylaws that you're going to do it that way. But administratively, at one point, we paid a certain amount of money to the UUA for everyone who was on our membership list. So from the point of view of good administration, at the point when we would issue our membership list to the UUA, we would go through and say, is this person an active member? Okay. And the whole idea of having supporting members, et cetera, and the waiver and all that, that was a way of kind of addressing that whole issue. So,
But
and
that's not how we're removing members now under the new policy. It's
Well,
not just inactive.
we will make it a
members.
policy so that we will say specifically what happened, you know, when does a member become not a member? And for the most part in the past, it's been people who essentially have walked away, and sometimes they've joined other churches and sometimes they tell us and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they've moved away and we discover it because they sent us a
I have
change
a
of
very
address.
simple question, Barb.
Yeah.
If we turn down the bylaw that says we can remove members, are you going to continue to have a policy that says active members, not inactive members, members that have a problem? Are you going to continue to have a policy based on the bylaw that we're turning down? That's my question. Right now, you've changed the policy to be with the new bylaw that we haven't approved yet. Getting rid of active members. So
Well-
if we vote that bylaw down, are you going to continue to have that as a policy?
I think the board has to talk about that. I can't respond to that. You need to unmute, Susan. You
Sorry
need to
about that.
unmute, Susan.
Yep, I got it. Thank you. So yes, Nikki, that question would need to come to the board because the board can always revise the policy based on feedback from the congregation.
So if the
So it's a
And the
matter of
bylaws-
whether,
so- Yeah, can I, sorry. So the board cannot pass policies that are in violation of the bylaws. So if the congregation, if the bylaws are amended in such a way that no one can ever be removed from membership ever, or however you might want to phrase that, I'm being over dramatic, I know. Then the board has to change the bylaws to be in accordance with that. That's
or the policy.
Policy.
yeah,
Yes.
the board has to change policies to be in accordance with the bylaws. So if
But if-
things change, if somebody wants to put an elaborate, search committee selection process in the bylaws, then we get rid of the policy. It's kind of like the policies respond to the bylaws. And if they're not in accordance, they need to change, and they will.
But if the bylaws are silent on an issue, the board can create policy for that issue.
And that's what I'm saying. Right now, you passed a policy based on what the new bylaw might be, but it's not in violation of the old bylaw.
It's not in
If-
violation of the current bylaws.
Right, that's what I just said.
Yeah. So
If the congregation turns down the new bylaw, there's still nothing in the bylaws then that says you can't have a policy on terminating an active member, so that in essence, you'd have to have a bylaw saying you can't when it's never been done before. I mean, it's like by voting down the new bylaw, you would think that that is enough of a statement, and yet the policy has already been drawn up. Even though, it's like, I feel like voting on this bylaw now became null and void. Why bother? Because the policy's there regardless of whether or not the bylaw passes. And I feel that's backwards. And that was one of my concerns, was getting rid of active members instead of just saying you're not safe, don't come back until you've been treated. And now
But see-
it's like, why bother even being upset about the bylaw changes, because the policy is already in place. And so the bylaw makes no difference. I'm just, that's where I'm at with this. I'm
Thank,
really upset with this, is where I'm at with this.
but are you,
I'm upset with the fact that the policy was made when the bylaw hadn't been there already to support it.
Okay.
And now the bylaw is after the fact and insignificant.
thank you for that feedback, Nikki. I appreciate your honesty about that. Tim, and then Brian, and we are getting up to just about time.
I have two comments. So I appreciate Nikki's concern, but, and maybe this will surprise people, I'll defend the board and the bylaws committee on this. In general, for many organizations, school boards, city commissions, all kinds of organizations, they have some bylaws or guidelines from law. And then if the law or whatever is permissive, they can then do various things. The debate by the congregation of the bylaws is not irrelevant because, Nikki, if you have concerns about the policies the board has adopted, you can propose to amend the bylaws at next Sunday's meeting to require that any removal of a member requires a 80% vote of the church membership or 63%, whatever. I mean, in other words, what is done with the bylaws is not irrelevant. It's just the fact that in general, if something isn't prohibited, and if it's in accordance, as Barbara's mentioning, since our bylaws refer to Robert's Rules of Order, that's kind of like the common law a little bit. So I don't think it's irrelevant. I think it's just that if you want to constrain what the board does, you need to stick that into the bylaws. Otherwise, the board can do a variety of things. I guess my second question is just a really substantive one. Susan, to your knowledge, is anyone planning to propose any amendment other than the amendment I'm proposing to Article 3?
No one has brought forward an amendment in advance, but that does not mean that we won't receive something while we're in the meeting.
Okay, just wanted to know. Thank you.
And Brian?
You're muted.
Barb, while I'm talking, can I call your attention to ask you to look at the current bylaws, Article V3, that's just to Barb. To everybody else, just so as a follow-up to the original point that Lois was asking about, the fact that there's likely to be an amendment is why Article V3, Section 3 won't allow us to have the process of absentee balloting, because it talks about providing there are no changes in said amendments. So the 10-day rule applies. And then the other question, which is also for Barb, and I'm kind of asking her on the cuff to triple check Article 12 as it relates to the fact that it says all supporting members. What is the current supporting member number? Do we know that yet? Have we figured that out? And I was concerned, Barb, that Article 12 was requiring any amendments to actually be all supporting members, or not all, but you know what I mean, a high percentage of.
Okay, I'm not quite clear what you're asking. Okay.
How many supporting members are going to be the number for creating this?
I think the number is
quorum?
162, but I'll produce the list this week and know exactly.
Okay.
You don't
and
need
that's-
162.
No, we don't. We need whatever it is, 25%.
25%.
So the supporting membership, our number is around 250. I have to check it
Yeah,
again.
you're
this
right.
week.
Okay,
And so our
162 is
quorum is
the
around
pledge unit. So I
63.
misspoke. You're right, 152 or something like that. So a quarter of that, which is where we get the 60 something.
Yeah.
Right
and
now, the number is 63 voting members in order to have a quorum.
And we,
So-
haven't eliminated people for lack of participation during the pandemic because we trust some people will cycle back around.
So, Barb, just triple check Article 12. It's talking about a 2/3 vote of all supporting members to make amendments to the Constitution. It may be something we overlooked in our planning. I hate to dump this on us right now, but just, we don't
No,
have to
it's going to
sort
be
it out today.
two-thirds of the quorum. 2/3 of the quorum.
I mean, I'm
Okay.
happy with that. I'm not gonna raise
Okay.
the. I'm glad we're sorting out the bylaws. because
2/3
we
of the
need to fix.
quorum.
So here's what happens. I produce the voting lists. People are, where you came in this morning and you signed in with Chris Schluter. Instead, we'll have the tellers there. And as you sign in for your registration for the service, you will get checked off the voting list and you'll be handed a voting card. Okay, so you go into the main room, etc. And hopefully we have more than 60 and 60, whatever the number is. Okay.
3.
And when the time comes for the meeting to start, Susan will ask how many voting members are in attendance. And because the cards are numbered they will automatically know the number of cards that they have given out, which is the number. And I'll answer Tim's question later. And so then at that point, we need to have 2/3 of the people voting in the room. Okay. Now, if everybody doesn't elect to vote, it's 2/3 of the people who vote. So it is important to not abstain. Okay. To make it more. Let's see what Tim wanted.
And thank you, Susan. You're right. It's 2/3 of those voting.
As long as nobody asks to confirm that the quorum is present. Once you've confirmed there's a quorum present and people leave, if you never ask, then the quorum is assumed to still be there. I mean, that's kind of a
Sneaky.
sneaky thing, but
So
that's the way.
I
the
am
rules go.
also hoping that we will not exceed a total of 2 hours. And that's why we're trying to break this into pieces, right? So that we can get the majority of it done, focus on the things that are of highest concern, come to at least some sort of move forward position the best that we can. Because again, it's a living document. We can always revisit particular pieces separately later, but we would really like to come out of this with a document that allows policy to go forward, for the bylaws committee to be able to move on to other work, and just really reset our congregation with a document that's a little more in alignment with our current social situation and the way that our world is evolving.
So
Tim's question about what if there's stuff that we pass, including the voting, couldn't people vote later in the meeting? And the answer is, this is a revision. If we were doing amendments, we could do amendments in order and they would take effect as they were voted on. But this is a revision and you do it all in. But that does mean that the next congregational meeting we have, if we voted, if there's some things that we absolutely can't agree on. So for instance, well, no, I shouldn't bring that up at all. Let's not go there.
Again, our goal is to come out of next week with a document that might not be everybody's ideal, but that it gives us enough of a basis that the board can help the congregation and the staff move forward. And again, always open to discussion and suggestions for revisions or refinements, because right coming up on the heels of this is going to be our May meeting, which hopefully, we'll have a little broader way to handle that from discussion and voting purposes. Cross my fingers.
And hopefully we have it enough so that the people who are on Zoom can also vote.
Yes.
Okay, bye, guys. Great discussion. Thank you all. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Barb. Thank you, everybody. Cool, I'm leaving.
All right. Thank you so much for everyone for being here. Please, if you're comfortable, please plan on coming. Thank you so much.
Thank you.